Dennis, just let me add that the Supreme Court Justice makes $205,000 a year. And one of the things that folks look at or don't look at when you retain a judge is that it's a contract and it has a price tag. So the associate justices don't make as much. Mr. Barr, I think, is making $190,000 a year, but that's a $1.9 million contract. The problem I have with somebody at 69 running at 70 is very similar to the position we have on resigned to run. As if you're not able to fulfill your term and you know that going in, you ought not be running. The other issue is a little more technical, that if he is retained, he possesses the capability to be appointed as a special judge. And I think some of us, Tim and I included, have some issues with essentially pinpointing a special judge to go to a case that perhaps may be controversial, but because you're a special judge, not object to retention or the voter's glare, you may take a position that's a little more dramatic than you normally would. So I think there's a lot encased in that. I'm not a big fan, by the way, of saying somebody has no value after 70. It's a rule. I mean, that's a rule. At 70, you have to retire. And it makes you wonder, why would somebody seek a 10-year term if they can only serve 10% of it? I think it's a legitimate question. I think it's an issue that we should discuss. And certainly, Tim pointed to it. I'm not really sure if you should be the person discussing that when the final decision is made.
Does the timing of this, the day before the primary, is that just coincidence? This has nothing to do with the primary, right?
Oh, no, it has nothing to do with the primary. The election isn't until the fall. But we thought we'd do it the day before the primary, partly because the Capitol is empty. There's not a whole lot of competition for news. But partly because this is when people are thinking about elections, the day before the primary. And this is something that we hope they will think about between now and November.
Mark, to be honest with you, that played a large part of it. There have been a number of recent incidents that I think have highlighted people's reasonable cynicism with the judiciary. Most importantly, the Ori Melvin sentencing. So I think this is an issue that we need to keep in front of us, because after the budget, when we go into the summer, people tend to take their eye off of it.
Tim, you mentioned the gambling law and then the pay raise, almost suggesting that it was basically a trade-off. Is that what you're saying, that they basically okayed gambling in return for this pay raise law, which they then also upheld partially?
Yes, I think that this is just me personally. I think that the decision in the slots gambling case was meant to be a template for the pay raise. It was the court telling the legislature, this is how you can do the pay raise, and we will find that it is constitutional.
But do you think that there were are you saying, and do you have any evidence that there was any sort of
I have
discussion
absolutely no evidence to support that, other than the knowledge that there were secret discussions between the three branches during the time that the slots gambling law was pending before the Supreme Court. And we know that those discussions were about the pay raise because former Chief Justice Ralph Cappy said so in an op-ed he distributed to all the newspapers in Pennsylvania after the furor erupted over the pay raise.
But even if there were a deal set up, it wasn't set up by Mr. Castille and Mr. Baer. They were both, colleagues on the court. The thing I've seen about the secret meetings, I've not seen either of them named as a participant in it.
The question is, was Mr. Castille involved in the secret meetings that took place around the pay raise? He doesn't have to be. I find it almost impossible to believe in a very closed network of 7 justices on the Supreme Court that Ralph Cappy was acting without the knowledge of the other justices. But even so, Mr. Castille wrote the decision in the pay raise case. He put his name on it. He could have dissented in that case. He could have stood up and said, no, this is not the way we're supposed to pass laws in this state. And instead, he decided to be the poster boy for doing things in what I consider to be a patently unconstitutional manner.
In your report, in your comments, you said your goal is not to make Ron Castille look like Darth Vader, but you made him look like the Emperor, pulling the strings that are going on through all this kind of stuff, including kids for cash. Are you exaggerating his role in all these?
Well, I don't think so. If you read the book that Bill Eckenbarger wrote about Kids for Cash, it's pretty damning. Ron Castille had lots of warning about what was going on in Luzerne County, including warnings from the Attorney General, the Department of Public Welfare, and the Juvenile Law Center, who submitted a request to the court to investigate what was going on in Luzerne County. The Supreme Court sat on that request for 9 months and then dismissed it without any explanation. And it was only after the federal government came in, arrested and prosecuted the judges that Ron Castille said, oh, I guess there's something going on, we better appoint a commission. And you see the same thing that happened in the Philadelphia traffic court case. The feds come in and they raid the traffic court in 2010. Ron Castille, who's supervising that court, does nothing. The feds come in and raid it again in 2011. Ron Castille does nothing until 2012. He says, oh my gosh, I guess there's something going on here. It's one of the reasons why his fellow justices unanimously removed him as the supervisor of Philadelphia courts this year. It's one of the reasons that the Philadelphia Inquirer, the family court debacle, said that he should resign as Chief Justice. Now, I'm not making up any of this stuff. You have it in front of you. Everything that we're talking about is on the public record.
But I think more importantly, there's acts of omission, which Tim just talked about, and acts of commission. And if you are the Supreme Court Chief Justice, it's about leadership. It's about modeling the behavior you want everybody else to follow, whether it's the justices, the thousands of other judges. And let me just say this, there's times when Justice Castille's gone out of his way to insert himself into issues like the construction of a new courthouse, like going to the Pennsylvania Society dinner and accepting gifts. So I think there's a record of omission and commission that, in my opinion, is a failure of leadership. It doesn't mean that he's had to have his hand or his fingerprints on everything that's gone wrong. Obviously it's not. He's got a body of work. We're trying to, in my mind, I think we're trying to look at the failure of leadership, the absence of leadership. The last decade has probably been the worst decade for Pennsylvania's judiciary. There's a reason for it. And, what Tim was saying before, and Mark, I think you're right, we'll probably wind up being more of a debate than a dialogue. I just think we need to have a discussion on how the judicial system works. There's a lot of things going on. My God, when you look at the attention we put, as we should have on the Sandusky case, but on the attention we didn't put in the Kids for Cash, where kids' lives were destroyed, that's forever. That, in my mind, in and of itself, is an act of omission that warrants somebody voting no for him. But that's the discussion I think we should all have. I'd like to hear what people say, hey, why do you want to vote for him?
I want to follow up on that with one thing from the Interbranch Commission report, and this has to do with a whole section in our voter guide about nepotism. The Interbranch Commission, Castille's own commission, said former judges Conahan and Chivarella hired family members and friends to work in the courts. The Interbranch Commission on Juvenile Justice determined that this was an extremely detrimental practice. It contributed to a breakdown in professionalism and to a breakdown in public confidence. Ultimately, as some witnesses before the commission testified, the environment for corruption became more fertile. Court employees were less likely to speak out against judicial misconduct if they had personal ties to the judges engaging in misconduct. The Commission is concerned that the employment of family members, close personal friends, or political associates creates the perception that hiring decisions are not based on merit and competence, and thereby undermines public confidence in the court. It is therefore recommended that the Court Administrator of Pennsylvania undertake a national study to determine the highest standards and best practices for court hiring policies and present the findings of that study to the Supreme Court for review. I was on the Interbranch Commission website last week. There's been no follow-up on that recommendation. And if you look at Allegheny County, you see 10 judges in Allegheny County who have family members on the payroll of the courts. The president judge of Allegheny County has both daughters and both sons-in-law working for the Allegheny County courts. It is a huge problem in Pennsylvania, and despite his own commission recommending that he do something about it, despite the American Bar Association Code of Ethics opposing it, he has done nothing.
Yeah. Is there any model you're basing the idea for a dialogue with someone else? You seen that before? Are you modeling that?
The question is whether there's a model for a discussion between a private citizen and a sitting Supreme Court Chief Justice. I don't know of one, but I'm sure that the law schools and the various associations can come up with one. I look forward to engaging in that.
Traditionally, detention campaigns are extremely quiet. Mr. Castille estimates he spent about, I think, $250 or $500 the last one. How do you, without the kind of money, unless he goes against a shell company and one of the big companies calls you the next morning, how do you get the sense?
That's a good question.
How do you raise awareness of this? I mean, judicial detention elections are something about 8, 10, 12% vote.
Right. And Pete's asking how you get attention for a judicial retention election, which gets very low voter turnout, it's very little media interest. And the answer is I don't know, except by doing things like this. 6 years ago, after Bruce Leibowitz had put out his 15-point plan for reforming the Supreme Court, I devoted most of that year with the Banner of Democracy Rising PA to a series called Justice on Trial. And I tried to engage people in each week, 15 separate installments of the points that Professor Leibowitz raised. I got absolutely nowhere with that. I'm hoping that because it's a Chief Justice, and I'm hoping because these problems of his administration and these decisions and his personal ethics are so egregious that people will see this as something worth talking about this year. Certainly there isn't very much else going on. It is a municipal election, lots of local elections going on, school board elections and so forth. But this is the big ticket, and it deserves public attention. It really does. We're going to do our best.
I'll tell you what though, Pete, off-year elections, it's not just because it's retention, it doesn't draw a lot of people. I think there's 3 different variables at play here. One is school board elections are now becoming more contested, and I think there'll be a lot of interest across the state. There are school board elections out there. I think number 2 is this. Even though in the other retention races we were involved in, those folks were retained, the turnout and the margin of victory were larger. In other words, the margin of victory was less, but the turnout was more. So I think we're building on momentum. I don't think the judicial issues go away. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about the replacement of Lori Melvin. And this could be a de facto referendum election for Mr. Corbett. So I think there's a lot going on. Is it unusual? Yeah, I'm going to be outspent. We've already spent more on today's press conference than Judge Castille spent to be retained last time. I guarantee you, he's going to spend more than $200.
And who's funding this?
Actually, Rock the Capital's funding it. We did, Tim and I basically put up the money ourselves, and then what we did is, it'll be on the web, but Rock the Capital, I think last year we took in $100. So this is a volunteer effort. We're doing it because we're passionate, interested, and we're concerned. This obviously is not going to do anything to further our career. I think we can safely say we now alienated all 3 branches of government with this campaign.
Do you think there's much chance that the justice is going to take you up on this?
I do, because I think it's his personality. Look, I think the game changer here is the fact that he's 69 and running for an office that he can only serve 10% of his term for. When you talk to people and you get past the other issues, they're having a hard time grasping why somebody wants to run for an office in which they can only serve 1/10 of it. So I think he's going to have to speak to that issue alone. But Pete, Mark, you're right. This is a difficult issue to sustain interest in the public. There's no doubt about it. But we were told that on July 6, 2005, it's just another pay raise. We were told that at the first retention election. So Tim and I have gone out of